Hey everybody, today I'm going to do a demonstration of the subtractive technique for drawing. All set up with the toned paper. It's got charcoal all over it. The basic idea behind subtractive drawing is that you're going to use as your primary drawing tool the eraser to bring the light back out of the paper. It's kind of an opposite way of thinking from what we're used to. Normally the paper's white, we're adding all the dark, and that's our job. For this technique, you want to be focusing on the light and revealing the light instead of revealing the dark. So we're going to be pulling the light back out of the paper to reveal the figure. One of the things I really like about this, and hopefully you'll see at the end, is that this technique really gives a strong sense of light striking an object, or in this case, a figure. And so you're giving the viewer that feeling that their form is being revealed by light shining onto something, which is really how we see things. And so this is a really useful method for drawing a figure, or anything for that matter. To get started, I'm going to use my 2B charcoal pencil. If you have a 4B, that's fine. I wouldn't go into a 6 or 8B or anything like that, and I wouldn't go much harder. We don't want to make very strong lines, but I do want to use this in an additive fashion, adding marks to the paper just to establish the pose. So this part is, well, it's going to be hard for you to see, but it's the same as what we've been doing all along. Really just trying to block in the big shapes that I see. And in this part of the drawing, I'm going to be thinking a lot about those sighting and measuring techniques we've been doing all along. Make sure things are proportionate in the right place, all of that. Realizing you can't see anything of what I've done, but if you're working nice and lightly with this pencil, you'll be able to see in your drawing where you've made these initial marks and what you might want to do with those from there. Just basically establishing the pose on the page. And then really early on, I like to jump right into the subtractive part and get some of that light to show itself. I'm going to start with the kneaded eraser, and I want you to really think about the last video where we talked about really concentrating on shapes. What are the shapes of the lights and darks? Where are those shapes? And what I'm talking about is what you don't want to do is take your eraser and then start doing a line drawing of what you see. That's just reverting right back to that reliance on line to describe things. Much quicker, more effective at this point is I kind of like to smash this out nice and flat as my thumb, and then just pull big chunks of light out. I like to think about the direction of things, where things are heading, as I decide on what direction my marks should take. I'm making corrections as I go. So if I see that something's off in my original drawing, I'm going to go ahead and pursue changing that. I'm not too concerned yet. I do have all the time in the world to make corrections as I go, but I do want to be thinking about where do I need to make those changes early. So the earlier I do, the better off I'm going to be. You can see already getting a sense of that figure starting to emerge from the darkness. That's what I'm after. I'm squinting my eyes a lot, almost almost the whole time. Usually during this part, I've got one eye open and one eye closed. And the eye that's open is squinted way down. So all I see are the big masses of lights and darks. And I'm constantly folding, kneading my eraser to reveal a nice clean edge. Now later I'll use this more for blending, and I won't be cleaning it off quite so much. But for now, I'm trying to remove material from the paper, and so it makes sense to be keeping that nice clean edge. One of the things that I notice whenever I'm working this way, and what I really like you to notice, is that it tends to give you more of that focus on the shapes of things, because you're not working with line. You didn't even really start from line so much. And so right off the bat, you're already in that mode of thinking of looking for the shape. What shape is it? Where does it go? How does it fit in the puzzle? And that's really where you want your mindset to be when you're working with value in a drawing anyway. Thinking about those overall shapes. I've got a pretty good general sense now. If I feel like I've made a mistake, if something's not quite in the right place, I'm going to go back to my compressed charcoal and let's say I need to move this in. Just cover it right up, chamois back in, and then you can make that correction. Because I haven't pressed down so hard with anything yet that I can't pull that light back out. So any part that I don't feel confident with, or I know I need to make change to, I can just push in on that shape from this outer space. As you can tell, the background in my photo is black. So at some point I'm going to want to be blackening all of that in anyway, so let that survive a little bit. But mostly I'm using that black background to help me create the foreground. So as I work along this outline space, I'm really using it to create the new edge of the figure itself. So kind of switching back to additive. Don't want to press too hard yet, because I may still need to move some things around, but I'm getting closer to the sense of what I'm after. That's my only job right now. I'm not pressing super hard. Keep it nice and light. There we go. So at this point, I've established the figure. It's pretty quick. I've pushed in some of the darker darks, things that go darker than the paper. That's additive technique. I'm using the eraser and pulling those lights out. That's the subtractive technique. I want to keep doing that, kind of switching back and forth as needed. And wherever needed, I'll switch to my pencil if I need to get a little more specific. I'm going to use my compressed charcoal to do bigger things inside of here, to think about shapes. And then, since we learned this with vine charcoal, if I get my kneaded eraser a little dirty, I can use that almost like a blending tool to soften the appearance of things. So what you're going to see next is just me doing all that work. So I'll be switching between a kneaded eraser, charcoal pencil, compressed charcoal stick. I probably will get my chamois back out. And then, of course, my vinyl eraser, where I really want to pull the lightest lights back out of the paper. So just follow along, see how it goes. I want to point out a few things since we took the time to study the anatomy. To think about how that's affecting what I'm doing here. When I'm looking at the light and dark pattern inside the back, for example, I'm seeing collections of muscles, and I'm trying to follow those as I'm doing my big smashed vine charcoal piece. I'm pulling the shape down. I'm recognizing that that's the upper part of the deltoid and part of the trapezoids right in there. And so that ridge of light that I see in there is because of the bulking out of the deltoid muscle. There's a ridge of light that's coming in through here. It's following the scapula. So I'm coming around that form and paying attention to what it does because of the anatomy underneath. That's what's causing what's happening on the surface in that space. In this big space here, seeing a lot of the roundness of the rib cage, but also, and coming all the way down to here, right along here, is the latissimus dorsi muscle. And so that ridge is catching light as well, because that's the bulkiest part right there. And so right across here, I'm pulling that light even lighter. And you can see in some of the more subtle things, the serratus muscles, the bottom edge of the rib cage pushing down into this leg, being in front of it, a little triangle of the abdominal muscles happening kind of right in here. So the point is that I am still paying attention to all that anatomical structure, and I want to look for that. You can see right here, this light spot here, and this one up here is cervical 7, so it's one of the vertebrae pushing out. It's that one you can feel on the back of your neck, at the base of your neck. And that's lining up where the spine is, and that gives me the indication in my drawing of where the difference between this side of the rib cage and that side is. This side is catching more light, this one's catching less. So that anatomical knowledge is informing what I'm doing as I develop the drawing further. Okay, I want to point out a couple things here as you can see I'm working, adding dark, removing light, adding dark, removing light, making adjustments to the drawing as I go, as far as placement, size, and shape and everything. But when I'm looking along this line where the thighs push into each other, I want to be really careful. And you'll see I'm going to take this lighter than it needs to be, but there are portions of this where this thigh is in front of this one, and I want to make sure that's evident. Then there are sections where this thigh comes in front of this one pushes back in front of that one, and then recedes and lets this one come back on top again. So whenever I have a crease or a line like that, and I'm working with light and shadow, I really want to think about how can I adjust that connection so this pushes in front of that, this pushes back across. So I want to set up that relationship because it's going to give more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to feel more honest and true to what you're really seeing to your viewer. You pay attention to those specific things happening in there. Same thing here. Anytime there's an intersection of things, I want to really think about what's closer to me, what's further away, how can I create that illusion in a better way for the viewer and make sure they're seeing the things I want them to see. And so you can see the muscle of the shoulder wants to be in front of the muscle receding back towards the scapula, which wants to be in front of the muscles along the side here, and then the breast pulling away from all of that. And then I know you can't see it in the reference, but there's just a little bit of light back here, probably of the other breast or the other arm. And so I want to think in those terms: closest, next closest, further away, furthest away, and use my method of shading to make that evident. The other thing I'm trying to do is, you'll see there's no outline anymore. There never was, but anywhere where two things run into each other, what I'm really asking is this thing lighter or darker than this thing? Is it at this spot on this part, is it lighter or darker than this part? And so by just pushing those lights and darks up against each other where they meet, I'm creating edges without having to have a line go around it. And that is the much more natural look that we want. The other thing I'll say right now is you see me adding in with a charcoal pencil, doing this really lightly and in that kind of glazing technique that we talked about with Vine. And so I'm going over entire spaces. That's why I didn't care too much that this was getting too light, because I know I can come back in and glaze over that whole section and push that light back in. What I want to do when I'm doing this with a pencil, I don't necessarily want it to feel like a pencil drawing. I want it to feel like a charcoal drawing. And so what I'm looking for is just glazing in a couple different directions so that I'm creating a nice even tone instead of a bunch of crosshatched marks. And so whenever I'm pushing a space to go darker than it already is in the drawing, I'm trying to do it in a very even fashion, as if I was taking the stick and making that wider swath of tone. Okay, one of the things I've been doing, I've just been working, building more and more subtlety into the drawing as I go, really looking closely at the patterns of lights and darks that I'm seeing and making adjustments as needed. One thing I want to point out, I talked about glazing with a pencil, that kind of smooth, even application across a whole space. I do this a lot with my eraser as well. So for example, I'm not happy really with what's happening up here. So I'll start erasing where I see the lightest part, but then with a really light touch, I'll go over this entire space here too. And see how that smoothed that out a little bit. So it's basically the same concept as glazing with a pencil. I'm just glazing with the erasure of things. And so I can push and pull even more specifics into the drawing by simply paying really close attention to how hard I'm pressing and then pulling those lights through. And as I work towards finishing up, there's a couple of things I definitely want to do. One is to push this background really dark. And the reason I want to do this now is I want to see the complete picture of contrast that I'm building. And so the darkest thing in this photo is the background. And so I want to start pressing in with that and pay really close attention to how that's running into the figure, how it meets. Where does that background even want to creep into the figure? Excuse me. Another thing that I will do is we'll look for the opportunity for disappearing edges. Disappearing edges are when the background value is equal to the value in the figure itself, and so there is no crisp edge between the figure and what's going on behind. And if that value is equal, there's no reason why I can't let that edge just disappear. instead of having a really crisp, clean edge like I have over here. One of the things that really does for your drawing is it allows to, well, it doesn't allow, it opens up the form. And so that it creates more of a sense of harmony in the whole thing and allows the viewer's eye to travel more easily in and out of the various pieces of the drawing. So this example, it allows their eye to travel into the figure from the background and vice versa. So I'll spend some time pushing the dark of that background even darker than I've got it now so that I see the real strong contrast between the figure and the ground. And then there's one last thing I like to do, and I really only like to do this as little as possible and only at the very end of the drawing. I'm going to introduce white charcoal. If you don't have a white charcoal pencil, you can use a Conte crayon, a white Conte crayon, something like that. Here's why I save this for the last and why I try to do it as little as possible. Adding white in here is going to give kind of a different appearance to the lighter shapes. So I don't want to go through everything and start adding this white. I also don't want to add white anywhere that it might blend with some of the black because it changes the nature of the drawing. This is a nice warm piece of paper, and if I start mixing the white with the black to create gray tones, I start getting this kind of cool gray, and it doesn't really fit with the nature of the drawing. So I'm only gonna look for the lightest and most highlighted parts and really just kind of work right specifically into them. I'm not gonna, again, do this everywhere, but right where I need to bring the lightest values back out. So there you have it. Again, as always, I could spend a lot more time on this, taking this even more and more specific to the photo, and even more subtle in some of the transitions, but the overall idea is the same as everything. We're looking for those big general shapes of light and dark. We're using that subtractive method to bring the light of the paper back out to the viewer. And then we're doing a back and forth game between additive and subtractive, using the charcoal pencil to do really subtle and soft things, using the charcoal stick to do the big, bolder, dark things, using the eraser as a drawing tool, not a corrective tool, and even feathering some of those tones there as well. So some of the keys here: squint your eyes for as long as possible so you're really just seeing the generalized shapes, and then really focus in towards the end and leave those little tiny details until the end of the drawing. And constantly be comparing one piece to another. Is this part of this lighter or darker than this part? If it is darker, by how much? If it's lighter, by how much? And develop the whole thing with that mindset, and you'll end up with a nice effect of light striking the figure.